At 14, Commodus was on the leading edge of when it was appropriate to don the toga virilis, which usually happened sometime between the ages of 14 and 18. But Cassius's revolt upped the timetable. Marcus had to be sure that whatever happened, his chosen heir would be literally man enough to succeed him. Though the immediate crisis ended with Cassius's assassination and the revolt petering out, the fact that Commodus was now a man would go a long way towards suppressing future insurrection. After all, the whole premise of Cassius's revolt was that, should Marcus die, a dangerous power vacuum would open up that the child Commodus would have been unable to fill. But Commodus the man, hopefully, was a different story. Father and son wintered in Alexandria, and then spent 176 making their way back to Rome. The settlement with the various German tribes seemed to be holding, and for the first time in a long time, Rome had no enemies to fight, so the emperor was free to return home. Both on his way to and returning from the east, Marcus initiated a number of reforms that he hoped would help nullify the causes of all the various troubles that had been plaguing the empire, up to and including the revolt of Avidius Cassius. First, his settlement with the Azygis, forced on him by circumstance, actually turned out to be a positive development, as Marcus dispatched 8,000 Azygi horsemen to Britain to help quell the native uprising there. At the same time, he collected an auxiliary force of some 20,000 allied Germans, that is, tribes whose peace terms with Rome had involved the pledging of troops, and ordered them to Syria, where they would set up shop and watch over not only the border, but the locals as well. The emperor also declared that henceforth no senator would be allowed governorship of his home province, as Cassius had been with Syria, and which was definitely part of the reason why he had felt so confident in his little power grab. The thrust of all of these initiatives is clear. The shuffling of regional forces would have had the effect of not only depleting the ranks of potentially rebellious natives, but also simultaneously putting them in charge of other natives to whom they had no affinity and no reason to support, and within whom the imported soldiers would find no support. And with the leadership brought in from yet another region, Marcus would be effectively alienating everyone from everyone else. In due time, he planned to recruit soldiers from the east and ship them up to the Danube to complete his circle of soldier, citizen, leadership alienation, and prevent future unifications of interest that led to things like Cassius's revolt. The imperial caravan made its way to Rome by way of Greece and Athens, where both emperor and heir were inducted into the Eleusinian Mysteries, an act of particular significance as it demonstrated that some degree of normalcy was returning to the Middle Empire, and that despite the destruction of its ancient temple, the mystery religion par excellence was still going strong. Marcus and Commodus remained in Athens for a time, enjoying one of the empire's great cultural centers, and while there, Marcus decided to echo Hadrian's push to rejuvenate the city, but instead of sponsoring architectural projects, he endowed 4 philosophy chairs, one each for the 4 major schools: Platonism, Aristotelianism, Epicureanism, and Stoicism, the latter of which obviously being the most near and dear to Marcus's heart. As I mentioned last week, when Marcus was not out fighting in the field, or in his tent resolving all the administrative and legal disputes that poured onto his desk, the emperor took time out to write a sort of philosophical diary as part of his daily quest to crack the underlying code of existence. The result, which we call the Meditations, but which technically has no proper name, does not read as a narrative, but rather as a series of short thoughts that express ideas independently of one another regarding whatever Marcus happened to be thinking about at the time. This can make the Meditations difficult to read straight through, but it is a style that lends itself particularly well to quotation, which is why passages from the book show up on magnets and calendars as often as they do in college curriculum. Also helping the text to remain eternally relevant is that Marcus was basically writing a series of reminders for himself as he strove to live virtuously. When you remove Marcus from the equation and read it yourself, what you get is a series of injunctions reminding you how to live virtuously. I think to varying degrees we are all always trying to improve ourselves, and here is this nice little collection you should act. It's probably a bit morbid in places, like when he tells you that when you kiss your child goodnight, you should remind yourself that they may be dead in the morning. But as self-help manuals go, you could do a lot worse than the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. When everything gets boiled down, Marcus is essentially rephrasing a few basic themes over and over again in dozens of different ways. Like when a police officer asks a suspect the same question over and over again in different ways in order to get them to trip up over their story. Marcus is basically trying to trip up his own head so that the really real truth can be revealed. But what is that truth? Who knows, but it certainly doesn't resemble in any way the universe as we perceive it. For Marcus, most of what we see and hear is either an illusion, like time or the apparent division of objects, or it is an objective fact that we emotionally misinterpret, like our negative posture towards death or our irrational attachment to glory. For the Stoics, this latter bit was of the utmost importance. They were always going on about representations, in an attempt to address how and why the human mind fails to properly grapple with all the sensory data that is thrown its way. Marcus returns to this theme over and over again, since, for the Stoics, good means only living virtuously, and evil means only the absence of virtue. Everything that doesn't fit into one of those two categories is of null value. Marcus cautions against getting involved with grief over the death of a loved one, or anger over the injustice of some crime, because these emotions stem from a fundamental misrepresentation within our own heads. We are not assigning the proper value to those events. Did you act as virtuously as you could have before the sad or mad event occurred? If the answer is yes, then your grief and anger are groundless. The universe unfolds itself, and we are mere witnesses. It was meant to be, and there is nothing you could or should have done about it. If you did not act virtuously, then your passions should not be directed at the end result, but on your own failure to perform the most noble actions possible. Now, obviously, there is a tension here between fate and free will that neither Marcus nor his fellow Stoics was ever able to work out. Marcus returns often to a few basic tenets. The universe is one unified force, time is an illusion, all that will happen has already happened and will happen again, our destinies are set from birth, etc., etc. But on the other hand, he also dwells on the fact that we are supposed to choose to live virtuously and make further choices to conform our lives to the will of nature, which implies that we could make different choices and live at odds with the will of nature. But if all existence is a single, simultaneously occurring event, then where does free will enter the picture? Is that before or after everything that happens already happened? Turning away from philosophy to a bit of poetic metaphor, what I think Marcus is trying to say is that the universe is like a musical chord, and we are each individual notes. We can either choose to pluck ourselves in harmony with that chord, or we can plug away on some discordant B flat. In Marcus's conception, the perfect fifth is good, and the only path to true happiness. That errant B flat, though, is evil. But philosophically, the logic of this metaphor becomes incoherent when you try to assert both fatalism and free will at the same time. That being said, there is a great deal to admire in Marcus's little nuggets of wisdom. Like, how much greater are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? Yeah, I think about that almost every day. Or, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. I take some comfort in that. And how about, the object in life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Yeah, preach on, brother. Or remember that there is a proper dignity and proportion to be observed in the performance of every act in life. Yes, I promise not to just mindlessly go through the motions. Or finally, do not act as if you are going to live 10,000 years. death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Okay, I'll try. The manuscript of the Meditations, originally written in Greek for the Emperor's eyes alone, somehow managed to get copied and was then published at some point in the years after Marcus's death. However, I have not been able to track down exactly how this happened, so if anyone out there has any information on this, by all means, let me know. From there, if I had to speculate, I'd say that it probably wound up in the Imperial Archives or one of the many private collections, and from there, transferred to the libraries of the Catholic Church, where the wisdom of Marcus was read, but more or less laid dormant for 1,000 years, before being picked up by Renaissance scholars who were looking to find truth in places other than the Bible. Since then, this little book of sayings has been lauded by scholars not only for its insights into the human condition, but also because it is one of the first examples of honest, personal, philosophic reflection. John Stuart Mill, for example, went so far as to compare it to the Sermon on the Mount. Ironically, the continued publication and citation of the Meditations keeps Marcus Aurelius as one of the most identifiable of all Roman figures. This, for a man who looked so disdainfully on the vainglorious quest for posthumous fame, and who constantly reminded himself how many who once rose to fame are now consigned to oblivion, and how many who sang their fame are long disappeared. Next week, we'll close the book on the living Marcus Aurelius, and try to note without too much sarcasm that the reason why we know so much about his life and times is that, in a vainglorious quest for posthumous fame, he ordered a magnificent triumphal column built to record his exploits for all time. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible. As you now know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with probably now more than 60,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again is audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 14-day trial membership. There is no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I'm going to recommend the first great work of political and military history, The Peloponnesian Wars by Thucydides. Rather than cobbling together myths and legends, Thucydides used interviews and written records in an attempt to accurately tell the story of the wars he himself had participated in. It's a fascinating read. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. Episode 95, The Beginning of the End. Don't worry about the title of this episode. The transition from Marcus Aurelius to his son Commodus is usually pointed to as the point at which the luck of the Roman Empire began to run out. But it has also been joked on more than one occasion that as decline phases go, we should all be so lucky to enjoy one as long as the Romans did. We are still 300 years from the last Roman emperor and more than 1,000 years from the fall of Constantinople. To put it another way, the United States has officially been a big